Let me tell you folks about what went down in Maplewood Acres last summer. If you've never lived in one of these perfectly manicured suburban neighborhoods with an active HOA, count yourself lucky. From the outside, it looks like paradise, rolling green lawns that look like they were cut with scissors, American flags waving in perfect synchronization, and kids riding bikes on streets so clean you could eat off them. But underneath that Instagram-perfect surface is a web of rules, regulations, and one particularly terrifying woman who treated the HOA rulebook like it was the Bible. I'm telling this story as your friendly neighborhood eyewitness, the guy who lives 3 doors down and saw the whole mess unfold like a bad reality show. The star of our little drama was my neighbor Sarah Jenkins. Sarah's a sweet, hard-working graphic designer in her 30s who works from home. She's the kind of person who minds her own business, plants flowers in her yard to make the street look nice, and always has a smile for the kids riding bikes. But Sarah had no idea she was about to become public enemy number 1 in the eyes of the HOA Queen Bee, Deborah Harrington, or as everyone secretly called her, Karen. It all started innocently enough with Sarah's Wi-Fi. As someone who spends 8 to 10 hours a day on video calls and cloud servers, a stable connection was non-negotiable. But over several weeks, her speeds dropped dramatically. Downloads that should have taken seconds took minutes. Meetings froze at the worst times. One night at 2 a.m., Sarah decided to check her router's connected devices list. What she saw made her jaw drop. There were 15 devices connected that weren't hers. She recognized some MAC addresses, Brenda's tablet from next door, the Johnson family's smart TV, even Karen's own grandson's gaming console. Sarah's open network had somehow become the neighborhood's free Wi-Fi service. Sarah wasn't looking for trouble. She simply logged into her router, changed the password to a 32-character beast that no one would ever guess, and went back to bed. The next morning, she was deep in a high-stakes client presentation when the pounding started at her front door. It wasn't a knock. It was the sound of someone trying to knock the door off its hinges. Sarah paused her screen and walked over. Through the peephole, she saw her, Deborah in all her glory, face redder than a stop sign, her perfectly coiffed blonde perm practically vibrating with fury. Sarah opened the door just a crack. Sarah Jenkins. Deborah shrieked before Sarah could even say hello. What on earth have you done to the internet? My daughter can't get her work done, the kids can't watch their shows, and Mrs. Abernathy can't even load her Facebook. This is completely unacceptable behavior. Sarah took a deep breath, keeping her voice steady like she'd practiced in the mirror. Deborah, it's my internet connection. I pay for it every month. People were using it without my permission, so I secured it. That's all. Deborah's eyes narrowed into slits. Your internet? In this community, we share resources, Sarah. We've always had open access. You're being selfish and disruptive to the harmony of Maplewood Acres. As HOA president, I demand you restore the open network immediately. Sarah almost laughed. Almost. Demand? I have the bill right here with my name and address. Would you like to see proof that this is my service and not some community fund? Deborah waved her hand dismissively, her HOA clipboard clutched like a weapon. Bills don't matter. The spirit of the community matters. You're hoarding a vital resource. The argument went on for several minutes with Deborah throwing around phrases like selfish millennial, Sarah was 38, and anti-community behavior. Neighbors were starting to peek out their windows. Curtains moved across the street. The embarrassment was starting to burn in Sarah's cheeks, but she kept her cool. She'd learned from previous HOA battles with Deborah that showing emotion only gave her more power. Finally, Deborah pulled out her phone with dramatic flair. That's it. You've left me no choice. I'm calling the police. This is theft of community services and a public disturbance. Sarah stood there stunned as Deborah dialed 911. Yes, this is Deborah Harrington, president of the Maplewood Acres HOA. My neighbor at 1428 Elm Street is illegally restricting essential utilities and causing a neighborhood disruption. Please send officers immediately. She hung up with a smug little smirk. They're on their way. We'll see what the authorities have to say about your little power play, Sarah. As they waited on the porch in the bright morning sun, the tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Sarah could feel the eyes of the entire cul-de-sac on them. Little did anyone know that this ridiculous fight over a Wi-Fi password was about to expose something much darker hiding behind Deborah's perfect white picket fence. The neighbors whispered behind their blinds. The kids stopped playing, and the peaceful facade of Maplewood Acres started cracking right before everyone's eyes. The police cars rolled up about 15 minutes later, lights flashing like some kind of suburban crime scene. Two officers stepped out. Officer Miller, a tall guy with a patient dad vibe, and Officer Davis, a no-nonsense woman who looked like she'd heard every crazy complaint before. Deborah was already in full performance mode, pointing at Sarah like she was a wanted poster. "Officers, thank goodness you're here," Deborah gushed, her voice dripping with fake concern. "This woman has maliciously cut off the neighborhood's shared internet. She's hoarding a community resource and disrupting all of us." Sarah calmly explained her side, showing her internet bill again on her phone. "It's my service. I found unauthorized users, so I secured the network. I even offered to let neighbors set up their own if they asked nicely." Officer Davis raised an eyebrow at Deborah. "Ma'am, do you pay for this internet service?" Deborah sputtered. "Well, no, but it's always been available. It's a community service." Officer Miller sighed. "That's not how it works. You can't just use someone else's Wi-Fi without permission. That's illegal. And calling 911 for a password change? That's misuse of emergency services." Sarah thought it was over. A warning, maybe a ticket for Deborah, and she'd finally get back to her meeting. But the universe had other plans. As the officers turned to leave, Officer Davis's gaze drifted to Deborah's yard, specifically to that massive, gaudy fountain Deborah had been bragging about for years. It was the centerpiece of her community pride display, with lights and water features that ran 24/7. Officer Davis's eyes narrowed. "Ma'am, what's that black cable running from your fountain along the side of the house toward the city utility box?" Deborah's face went from angry red to ghostly white in a split second. "Oh, that's just some old wiring for the garden lights. Nothing to worry about." But her voice cracked like thin ice. The officers weren't buying it. They walked over, took a closer look, and sure enough, it was a homemade electrical hookup tapping straight into the city's power grid. Deborah had been stealing electricity for years to power her backyard Versailles without paying a dime. Officer Miller's entire demeanor shifted. "Ma'am, you're stealing power from the city. This isn't about Wi-Fi anymore. This is felony theft of utilities." Deborah started shaking, offering weak excuses about her late husband setting it up years ago. But everyone could see she was lying through her teeth. The irony hit like a freight train. The woman who just called the cops on Sarah for stealing community resources was the real thief all along. Sarah stood there, heart pounding, as the officers snapped photos and radioed for backup. The neighbors who'd been gossiping about her now stared at Deborah in stunned silence. The perfect HOA queen was crumbling right in front of them, and the feeling of sweet, sweet justice was just starting to bubble up. Deborah's smug mask shattered completely. "This is a misunderstanding," she pleaded, turning to Sarah with desperate eyes. "Please, just tell them it's nothing. I'll get my own internet. I'll drop all those violation notices I sent you last month about your mailbox color. Just don't let them do this." Sarah crossed her arms, finally letting a small, satisfied smile creep onto her face. "You called them here, Deborah. You wanted the authorities to decide who's right. Looks like they did." The officers weren't playing games. They called the power company right there on the spot, and within the hour a crew showed up with hard hats and clipboards. They spent the afternoon disconnecting Deborah's illegal setup, installing a proper meter, and slapping her with immediate fines that made her knees buckle. The fountain, her pride and joy, sputtered to a pathetic stop, water draining away like her reputation. Word spread through Maplewood Acres faster than a viral TikTok. By evening, the neighborhood group chat was exploding with screenshots of the violation notice the power company left on Deborah's door. Felony utility theft. Years of unpaid power. The same people who'd sided with her earlier now turned like sharks smelling blood. "How many of us paid extra dues while she stole electricity?" one mom typed. Another added, "Remember when she fined me for my holiday lights being tacky?" Sarah sat on her porch that night, sipping iced tea, watching the drama unfold from a safe distance. She'd spent weeks quietly documenting every petty HOA notice Deborah had thrown at her. Grass half an inch too long. One too many political signs. even a complaint about her unsightly laptop visible through the window. She'd been patient, collecting evidence like a pro, waiting for the right moment. Now that moment had arrived, and the satisfaction was better than any Wi-Fi speed test. But Deborah wasn't done fighting yet. The next day, she showed up at the emergency HOA meeting she'd called herself, trying to spin the story. It was an honest mistake, for the good of the community. Her voice trembled as she clutched her clipboard like a life raft. The room erupted in laughter, dark, biting laughter. One neighbor stood up. Like the mistake, when you find my kid's lemonade stand for not having a permit? Another chimed in. Or when you threatened to tow my car because the tires were too dirty? Sarah didn't even have to say a word. Her quiet presence in the back row said everything. The board voted right there. Deborah was out as president, effective immediately. The new board promised to review all her old fines and refund the ridiculous ones. Deborah stormed out, head down. The same woman who'd ruled with fear now reduced to a cautionary tale. The power company investigation didn't stop at the fountain. Turns out Deborah had been running the scheme for 7 years, saving herself thousands while preaching community standards to everyone else. The fines piled up, over $15,000 in back payments and penalties, plus a visit from the city attorney threatening actual charges if she didn't pay up fast. Her fancy fountain stayed dry and ugly, a permanent monument to her hypocrisy. Neighbors who'd once feared her now openly mocked the situation. Brenda from next door, one of the original Wi-Fi freeloaders, brought Sarah a homemade pie as an apology. I had no idea she was the real thief, she said sheepishly. The kids started calling the dried-up fountain Karen's Karma Pond. Even the mailman gave Sarah a thumbs up every morning. Sarah's internet had never run smoother. No more mystery devices sucking her bandwidth. Her work calls were crystal clear, deadlines flew by, and for the first time in months, she felt like she could breathe in her own home. But the real win wasn't the speed. It was watching the entitled queen of Maplewood Acres get exactly what she deserved. At the next monthly HOA meeting, the new president, a mild-mannered retired teacher named Mr. Patel, publicly thanked Sarah for bringing accountability back to our community. Sarah stood up, voice steady but laced with that perfect touch of sarcasm she'd earned. I just wanted to use my own Wi-Fi without drama. Turns out the biggest rule breaker was the one making all the rules. The room applauded. Deborah wasn't there. She'd stopped showing her face entirely. Rumor had it she was house hunting in another state, her perfect perm probably frizzing from the stress. The woman who'd spent years controlling every blade of grass and every holiday light now couldn't even control her own backyard. Sarah went home that night feeling lighter than she had in years. She'd stayed patient, documented everything, and let the universe do the heavy lifting. One Wi-Fi password change had exposed years of theft, lies, and power tripping. The lesson was crystal clear. In these picture-perfect suburbs, the loudest rule enforcers are often the ones hiding the biggest messes behind their white picket fences. Maplewood Acres felt different after that. The lawns were still perfect, the flags still waved, but the fear was gone. People started questioning the rules instead of blindly following them. And every time Sarah drove past that sad, empty fountain, she couldn't help but smile. Justice wasn't just served, it was delicious. So yeah, folks, that's how a simple Wi-Fi password turned our quiet little suburb into the talk of the town. Sarah never asked for the spotlight, but she handled it like a champ, patient on the outside, steel on the inside. Deborah? Well, her reign of terror ended with a whimper and a very expensive utility bill. The power company even sent a crew back to rip out the rest of her shady wiring, and the neighborhood voted to plant a nice little community garden, right where her fountain used to be. Poetic, right? The black humor of it all still cracks me up. Karen spent years finding people for unsightly bird feeders and inappropriate lawn ornaments while secretly stealing electricity like a pro. She'd lecture everyone about the good of the community while picking their pockets through inflated dues and made-up violations. Classic suburban hypocrisy, rules for thee, but not for me. And the best part? She called the cops herself. She invited the spotlight right onto her own backyard crime scene. That's not just karma. That's karma with a side of poetic justice and a big helping of public humiliation. Sarah told me later she almost felt bad for a split second when Deborah begged her to make it go away. Almost. Then she remembered all those nasty little notes slid under her door, the group chat whispers calling her that difficult woman, and the way Deborah's face lit up every time she handed out another fine. Nope. No sympathy. Sarah just looked her dead in the eye and said, "You wanted to see who's right." The officers decided. Maybe next time you'll pay your own bills instead of playing queen. The whole block changed after that day. People started actually talking to each other instead of spying. The new HOA board rewrote a bunch of the ridiculous rules Deborah had pushed through. No more fining someone for having their trash can out in extra 10 minutes. They even added a common sense clause. Neighbors who used to side with Deborah now brought Sarah cookies and asked for her Wi-Fi advice. Politely, of course. And that dried up fountain? It became the unofficial neighborhood meme. Kids took selfies in front of it with captions like, "Don't be a Karen." Sarah's work life exploded in the best way. With stable internet and zero HOA harassment, she landed 2 huge clients and even started a side hustle teaching other remote workers how to secure their networks. She told me once, laughing, all it took was one password and one very nosy president to turn my life around. I still see Deborah around town sometimes, head down, perm a little less perfect, driving a car that definitely doesn't scream HOA royalty anymore. She can't even look at Sarah's house without speeding up. The woman who loved control lost every ounce of it the second the cops shone a flashlight on her dirty little secret. So here's the takeaway, straight from the front porch of Maplewood Acres. Sometimes the smallest thing, a Wi-Fi password, a single click, can topple the biggest bully on the block. The people who scream loudest about rules are often the ones breaking them hardest. And when karma shows up wearing a police uniform, oh man, the show is spectacular. If you've got your own HOA horror story or a Karen neighbor who's secretly breaking every rule she enforces, drop it in the comments. Did Sarah do the right thing by staying quiet until the perfect moment? Should she have given Deborah a break? Or was this the exact brand of justice our suburbs need? Let me know. I read every single one. And if this tale of suburban revenge and sweet payback made you smile, smash that like button, subscribe for more real-life neighborhood nightmares, and hit the bell so you never miss the next takedown. Until next time, keep your lawns perfect and your password stronger. Talk soon, neighbors.